Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Happy to be here with you again. One of the most rewarding things of being a so-called alternative researcher is that I get to meet and talk with so many fascinating, truly out-of-the-box people. You know, those people who are thinking about the world in very original ways, who have ideas and research of their own that all too often is ignored by our establishment-driven culture. James Fox is an extremely talented filmmaker who has dedicated himself to documenting the reality of the UFO phenomenon for more than a quarter of a century. Films like Out of the Blue and I Know What I Saw are classics to the field. And James is now completing a remarkable new documentary on the UFO phenomenon. It's called simply The Phenomenon. I was privileged to see a screener of it recently, and I came away very impressed. It's a remarkable piece of, I would call it video journalism, as well as something that just tells a fascinating story. I think that when it's released later this year, people are going to be very much affected by it. James made himself available to talk about his film. He was on a cell phone connection, but we made it work. Please enjoy this great conversation I had with filmmaker James Fox. James, welcome to the Richard Dolan Show. It is a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
We've got you. I know you're on your cell phone, but I think your sound is pretty good. People will be able to hear you well enough. So I'm just excited about having you on because you've got a new documentary film on the UFO subject about to be released. It's called The Phenomenon. And I'll just let listeners know, I watched it all last night. I was able to, you graciously supplied me with a pre-release screener. And I think it's a really important and a very well done documentary, and I think people would love to hear you talk about it.
Well, thank you, by the way, for that introduction. And I think even if our voices sound scratchy, the content of this interview is going to be sizzling hot, so it doesn't matter. I'm kidding.
Right.
But I would like to start off just by saying that I made a lot of mistakes in my 26 years of filmmaking on the topic. But each time I'd like to think that I've learned from those mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes was when I finished I Know What I Saw in late 2009, it went to Lionsgate, and the owner of Lionsgate was really excited about it. It felt really compelling, and they wanted to buy it. But as it went up through the tech department, they ultimately took a pass on it, and their reasoning was that the production quality were not up to par. It was shot on different cameras and frame rates and archive material, and it was a devastating blow to me because for a number of reasons.
Exactly.
It's always been my goal to produce a really high-level, highly polished production on topic of UFOs that can be delivered mainstream, and I just failed every time. I kept failing, and I said at that moment, never again. I will not make that mistake again. And some of the problems that creates is that to do it the way I wanted to do it, or I felt it needed to be done, is very expensive. Lighting and sound and cameras, and so that's another reason why this film has taken so long to make. Because I wouldn't settle for anything less. I wanted 60-minute style reporting, and I wanted it to be really beautiful, and I wanted it to be global, and I wanted it to be able to be presented to mainstream. So if we penetrate a much broader audience, as been my goal for decades, they wouldn't have a very comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon. Therefore, I felt I was going to have to go through some of the material that I've previously gone through. And I tried to do new archive stuff, and new interviews, and new perspectives, and new angles. We're incredibly fortunate to get Doc Valet on board, and he was our science advisor and consultant. And
Valet was really. Oh, so sorry. I was just going to say Valet was very important in your documentary. He had a very significant role, which I think a lot of people will definitely appreciate. I just want to jump onto one other thing you said, which is about the production quality. It's not something that a lot of viewers think about, I'm sure. Like you did Out of the Blue years ago, which was wonderful, and you did I Know What I Saw, and you've done 701, and
I did 50 years in denial.
yeah, so I know you're very experienced, and your films have done well. I have no doubt, but there's a difference between doing well for the UFO market, I think, and then trying to get the production values at the level for national distribution, and to reach that broader market with the top of the tier technology, which you've done for the phenomenon. And I believe you're getting a theatrical release out of this.
Yeah, we're going to be released in 700 to 900 theaters across the state, and if it performs well, then it's going to be double. I mean, it'll just keep increasing.
Is that an unusual thing? I'm trying to think of other UFO movies or documentaries that have had major theatrical releases. There may have been a few, but I'm not thinking that there's been too many. Am I right?
The only one that I know of, and I could be, completely off the mark here, I think there was a limited release in theaters of UFOs Are Real back in the late 70s or early 80s with Dan Friedman, that documentary that came out.
So you're thinking nothing in the decades since then? Not
that I'm aware of. Not a bona fide UFO documentary on UFOs in theaters. I don't think. In fact, everyone I talked to says this is the first, but I think there might have been a very limited release from UFOs Are Real back in the late 70s. I'd have to look into that, but
okay, if there are any, then I think it's fair to say there haven't been many, if at all. So this is an unusual step for sure, and it seems like a pretty big release. You've got more than 700 theaters, so good for you and good for us, because I'll just say this and then let you jump right in. I thought your documentary, before I started watching it, I didn't know how you were going to cover the UFO subject. I watched the trailer, which I thought was really good, but it also struck me as kind of going in a lot of different places. Like there's a lot of really cool UFO history from way back in the 50s, and then you had clips dealing with the ATIP and the Tic Tac, news of the last couple of years. And I thought, well, you're covering a lot of ground. But I have to say this, you really covered it very well. Please let me say this. You did the history very nicely. You jumped into a nice segment then on UFOs, basically UFOs and nukes, which I thought was nicely done. And then you kind of moved it forward toward the more contemporary situation. You got Harry Reid in there. You got David Fravor in there for the Tic Tac case. And then you ended it very nicely dealing with contemporary or recent cases of contact and really focusing on the amazing 1994 Ruwa, Zimbabwe school children case. And that was very gratifying to see. So, and you walked people through in a way that, like, if they knew nothing about the UFO subject, I think it was very powerful. And for those of us who have followed the UFO subject, I must say there were clips in there that I had never seen before. It was, for me, a total thrill to see James McDonald get so articulate and so passionate in that one clip you had of him back in the 60s. And there were lots of those. So that was a gratifying experience. I think you've got something for everyone in there.
I have. Thank you, by the way. I really wanted to, cover those familiar stories, but even right down to Edward Condon. We found footage of Condon. I couldn't find any footage of Condon when I was producing Out of the Blue, and then what I saw, I wanted to find stuff, but I didn't. But we hired, an archivist for I think the best part of 2.5 years, and just digging this stuff up. I mean, the United Nations presentation in 1978. The very man, Lee Siegel, who put that on, and Jacques Vallée, they were, as far as they were concerned, there was no footage really of that event having happened. And I remember I kept saying to Lee, like, how could you not have filmed this? Like, this is an historical event. Where's the cameras? He's like, I've been looking for 40 years, and then we found that in a whole treasure trove of other material. We were so excited, we just couldn't believe it.
Let me just, I want to jump in again. I'm so sorry, but I think people really they should understand the significance of what you're saying here. So back in 1978, the United Nations had its only extended hearing on UFOs. It was promoted by the Prime Minister of the little nation of Grenada, Sir Edward Gary, and he had an interest in this, and he was able to organize this hearing. It was against the pressure of the U.S. and Britain, by the way. They were dead set against it, but he got it going anyway. He had Hynek there, he had Vallée there, he had Gordon Cooper there. As you mentioned, Lee Spiegel, our colleague, was there as a young man. And this was historic.
Was there.
Yes. I mean,
the helicopter in 74.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. The from Michael Pat Coyne, I think his last name was, the helicopter pilot from 1973, an amazing case. Yeah, this was, so it was really historic. And yeah, you got, it was fantastic to see video of that in your documentary. I don't think anyone has seen that. That was incredible.
Jacques hadn't seen it. But anyway, so we found this material that was 6 months ago to Jason back and forth and exactly what we wanted. There were so many complications of getting to release. And at the last minute, I cannot tell you how much time we spent in the level of attention, the fastidious nature of this company that we were dealing with. I mean, it took pulling your teeth out, for months and months and months. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we were so excited to get our hands on this material. The guy goes, actually, it's not available. But none of it's available. Like,
really?
What do you mean none of it's available? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, no, actually, we don't have the rights. It's not available. And then it's all gone, right? I had a coronary. I got so close to having my hands on all this incredible material. So there's a guy really high up in the food chain, the entertainment industry, like really, really high up, and I won't mention his name, but every now and again I will, call on him when I need help. But he knows the owners to all, like CBS. He's very, very well connected. But in any case, I brought to his attention, and I don't call on him unless it's absolutely necessary. So I called the guy up, and I told him what happened. I was devastated. And he said, oh, my God, you're kidding. I said, no. And he said, now it's all gone. And he said, well, gosh, it's funny. Who owns the company? And I said, it's owned by CBS. He goes, oh, I had dinner with the owner last night. Let me give him a call. So he gives the guy a call. I'm not kidding you. Gives the guy a call. The owner of CBS sends an email to the company that I was dealing with. I don't want to mention the name of the company. It doesn't matter. But so in that case, and he says, you give James whatever he needs, and you full cooperation with James. And the guy was like, okay.
Sir, yes, sir. That's gratifying.
Yeah, and then he's like, well, we have the United Nations there, but we don't own the rights to it. He's like, okay, all right. So what hoops do we have to do with this? So then we had to contact the United Nations with the help of Lee Spiegel, and then Lee Spiegel, they said, well, we don't really know who owns the rights. CBS,
well, it's like 45 years old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so
or more.
Lee Spiegel had kept the letter from Sir Gary during the United Nations back in 1978 saying that if there was any audio or video, that Lee would have the rights to it. So he had kept that letter, which we presented to the United Nations, and then eventually we finally, after 6 months, got our hands on all that stuff.
Wait, I just want to make sure that everyone understood that because I can hear you, but it is a cell phone connection. But you're saying that Lee Spiegel had an old 40-plus-year-old letter from the UN stating that he would have rights to the video. Is that what I understand?
That's
and
right.
He pulled it out. This is the kind of hoops that filmmakers I know have to jump through, especially when you're doing documentary. And you had a lot of old clips. I just want to point one other out, if I may, which was the pilots Nash and Fortenberry. And, this is a 1952 event that most people have no idea about this sighting. This is something that when you're studying UFO history, you think, my God, what an incredible thing. But this was in the summer of 52, about a week before the overflights, the first weekend of overflights of UFOs over Washington, D.C., and most people know about that, but they don't know about the Nash Fortenberry sighting. And these were two pilots, and what they encountered was a really remarkable sighting of an object that did a sharp angle, ultra high speed turn and then zipped off at an unbelievable speed, like essentially the way that the Tic Tac UFO was described from the 2004 encounter. But this was 1952. And what I loved to see was you had video of one of the pilots some years after the fact, just sitting in his living room talking about it. And when you see these guys, clearly, with very, very excellent technical and professional qualifications, describing what they encountered, that's very powerful. And I really believe that viewers will appreciate that segment.
Well, that was Tom Tulian, Project Sign Archive.
Oh,
and
yes.
we had learned about the existence of that footage and the interview with Al Chop, who was in the radar room that night in 1952 when the Capitol was buzzed.
Yes, indeed,
Al Chop. We'd heard that this footage existed, but we couldn't get our hands on it. We were reading the online, and long story short, we find out that this gentleman, Tom Tulian, we contact him. He says, no, I don't have beta SP tapes. Then we found out that we were working with Jacques Vallée, and he said, oh, you're working with Jacques Vallée? Yes, I do have the beta SP tapes. And so
okay.
Tom Tulian flew out from, I think he was on the East Coast somewhere, and him and myself and Jacques Vallée all went out to dinner together. And then Tom made those tapes available to us for the first time in history.
That's fantastic. Yeah, he's a longtime UFO researcher who's very, very serious and very excellent. So it's great that you were able to connect with all these people who've got these little clips tucked away here and there, and you gathered together so many of them. So that, watching that old history, that's really the first segment of the phenomenon is the early years. And for me, having studied so much of that, it was just nice that it was brought to life in the way that you did, so that all of us now can see these people and hear them. You have an old clip of Donald Kehoe. There's a clip of James McDonald, which I just thought was fantastic. And so many of these other early researchers who honestly, truly paved the way for, where we are at today.
Yeah, isn't it amazing, the 1966 stuff, the landing case in Michigan? We found that footage in color. It's color.
So again, people may not be aware of this, but back in 1966, there was a big year of UFO sightings in the United States, and there were quite a few in the area of Dexter, Michigan. There was a university there, Hillsdale College, and actually for quite some time, people were seeing and reporting very, very vivid, clear sightings of what we would just call UFOs or flying saucers, including a landing case. You did get into that. You got into the whole press conference with Alan Hynek, where he was brought in, and really the low point of Hynek's public career, I think it's fair to say, where he comes up with marsh gas, swamp gas as the explanation, and how that blew up. So yeah, you had a whole nice segment on that. That was very, very interesting indeed.
Richard, I felt it really important to do a snapshot history of how we've gotten to where we are today, how the different policies have come about within the military and government official, chain of command, I guess you'd say. And because when the New York Times story broke of the secret UFO Pentagon program and the Tic Tac and the flight characteristics and the 5 observables all came out, I really wanted to demonstrate early on for the general public to educate them that this has been going on for a long time.
Yes.
Not just some modern day, and
exactly.
And, I was researching the Socorro case and the coral landing, 1964 with Lonnie Zamora, the first really well documented close encounter of the third kind in U.S. history. Really well documented. And I was in the depths of doing that when the story broke of Tic Tac. And I remember thinking, the Tic Tac, okay, Tic Tac. You got the egg that Lonnie said, white egg, white Tic Tac. There's some similarities there,
Absolutely.
you know. And this is 1964. And this is like 2004.
Right.
So I just wanted to make it very obvious that this is not anything new.
Yeah, that's the most important takeaway that people will get from this first segment of the phenomenon. It's the first part, that historical retrospective, is that, again, you bring these old cases to life so that people can listen and see the witnesses, and you hear them with your own ears, and you make it clear this is not a new phenomenon. The impossible sightings go back right on through our history. So that, I think, was very, very strong. And then, if you don't mind, if we move to the next segment, which really you have a very nice piece on the relationship of these UFOs and their interest in nuclear technology. Can we talk a little bit about that and how you treated that?
Absolutely. I can tell you how that came about.
Sure.
So George Knapp was highly influential in landing the interview with Senator Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid.
Yeah.
And we were so lucky. I won't bore you with the details because it's just months and months and months of negotiations, and then it almost fell apart at the 5 minutes before we started. It was the most tenuous thing I've ever been a part of in terms of making it actually happen. And after the interview, I said, would you mind terribly if we just did a really, and he had, Secret Service people with him and aides, and I mean, he was like, swept into the room to do the interview, and then now we got like 15 other appointments got to race off to. I said, hey, would you mind really quickly if I get a B-roll shot of the two of us walking? He said, yeah, let's do it on the way out. So we take the pictures, we go to the hallway, we do it, the walk and talk, real quick B-roll, doesn't have more than a couple minutes. And I just happened to ask him, kind of like not even Mike, but I said, hey, what were some of the more phenomenal aspects of the phenomenon, or alarming aspects of the phenomenon that you uncovered in this program? And he said, probably the fact that he's shutting our news down. If the president had called, there was a couple of cases he talked about, if the president had called Dolan, he couldn't have. And I thought, oh my God, I got to cover this section in the film. Well, who knows this better than anybody else? Robert Hastings.
Yes.
So we went back to the drawing boards, and we spent 2 years putting that section together.
Well, I want to add that there's a lot to cover there. So your interview with Harry Reid, which comes through very nicely in this, I liked it because, again, it gives it's a kind of a deep conversation where you really let Senator Reid talk about the importance of the UFO phenomenon in general. And it's very easy to see that he actually cares. This isn't just him talking a game. It's very obvious when you listen to him speaking that he actually genuinely cares about the UFO subject, that it matters to him. And I think, there's a lot of critics of Reid and of the ATIP program, and there's people even to this day who will say, oh, he's just in bed with his buddy Bigelow, and it was all a sweetheart deal. Looking at it very cynically, and I don't agree with that perspective at all. I look at Bigelow as someone who's very sincerely, genuinely interested in the UFO phenomenon and very sophisticated about it as well. And Reid is his friend, and you can just imagine that the two of them have probably had many long conversations about UFOs. And it's significant that, Reid was one of the most powerful senators in the United States government. No one knew for years and years that this man had a deep interest in UFOs. I think it's very significant that you had someone of his stature who, at least in retirement, has been willing to talk about this. And you got him very nicely on camera doing that. That was really good.
Oh, thank you. That moment, I call it the water swig moment. It's like, yes. I asked him kind of point blank, the level of resistance he said he had from the intelligence agencies was quite significant.
And he took a swig of water just before he said that.
Yes. And I asked him that really poignant question, and I just didn't know which direction it was going to go in, and he takes a little sip of water, and then he drops the bomb.
Yeah, well, please tell people. You can do that, I'm sure.
Well, it's okay. They'll have to find out.
We don't want to get. Well, I think we can just say he discussed tremendous resistance from within the Pentagon bureaucracy, right?
Yeah.
About the
Yep.
establishment of the ATIP program, and you could tell like this was something that really, to this day, got under his skin. It really bothered him. The fact that he had to fight so diligently against the Pentagon and the established bureaucracy to get any kind of UFO related funding program going was really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and it was bipartisan. The team that he put together to approve it,
Yeah.
Earmarked the funds with Republicans and Democrats. So I thought that was really cool. They were working together on that.
Absolutely. And the other thing about the UFO and nukes that I was actually glad that you brought this up, because everyone talks about the cases in which UFOs disable or appear to disable our nuclear weapons. But there have been a few cases through the years where it is believed that they might have done the opposite, which is activate nuclear weapons, or activate, we should say, launch sequences, which is a little more accurate. And you covered a little bit about that, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
James, we're going to take a quick break right now, and we'll come right back. I'm Richard Dolan here with filmmaker James Fox. We're talking about his new film coming out, The Phenomenon. Stick with us. We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with filmmaker James Fox discussing The Phenomenon, his new upcoming film all about UFOs, scheduled for major release in theaters, as well as a device near you, I'm sure. So, James, continue. We were talking about UFOs and nukes and activating launch sequences. Are you able to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so we worked obviously incredibly closely with, in fact, he was our guy. I mean, it wouldn't have happened without Robert Hastings, period. But in one of the aspects that I reluctantly covered, because it's kind of scary, is the fact that they've not only disabled nukes, but they've enabled them. In other words, they've activated launch sequence. Which kind of says, that in fact, I remember one of the most poignant statements in the movie for me personally as the filmmaker, was when Robert Salas is kind of making sense of it all at the podium at the National Press Club. And he kind of said, what does this mean? What are you guys doing with nuclear weapons? That's the message that he was getting, that they can turn them on, they can turn them off, they have full control. We think that we are almighty, That's what I interpret from it.
That was a Robert Salas drop mic moment, by the way. You see him, he's talking at the stage, and he just says that and walks right off. He might as well just drop the mic. But yeah, it was actually, it was significant. You talked about, there was a 1982 case over in Ukraine where I think researchers were familiar with this, and it's always a little tough when you get an old Soviet case because, Western researchers were not as familiar with the Russian and Soviet cases, and it's hard to judge when you hear about them. But then you brought up, by the way, I think that case is true nonetheless, but then you brought up a 1966 case at Minot Air Force Base where this also appears to have happened, and you got a very interesting statement about that. So I thought it was quite interesting.
That's all thanks to Robert Hastings. He was absolutely amazing. And we had to whittle down 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 10 hours, down to 7-8 minutes. I'm not sure how long that segment is, but it's not that long. We couldn't dedicate too much of it to the film because we weren't even planning on having that section in the movie. Again, it just happened as a result of my interview with Senator Reid. And the Russian stuff came from George Knapp, when George Knapp went to Russia in 1993.
Yes.
And we featured a lot of the footage in the film. and where there was a crack in the wall. There was a moment of transparency, and it was happening both in the United States and elsewhere. And it was a very exciting time, and I think that we might be approaching that time again now.
Well, we'll see. The 1993 interview, you had George Knapp with General Igor Maltsev, who was head, I think, of Soviet air defense back in the late 80s, and was the man on the spot when the Soviets were having some unbelievably close encounters, their Air Force, with these UFOs that were easily outperforming them. So do you think that we're getting to that point here in our society where the dam is going to break? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, here's what I've never been a huge proponent of official disclosure, but I do remember asking Nick Pope about this in London, right in front of the Parliament, about 10, 12 years ago, and he said, "Well, think of it more as disclosure with a small d," and it comes in many forms. I mean, you look at someone like Christopher Mellon, the fact that he's participating and really getting the word out. Whether, they feel that this is going to be frightening to some people, going to jolt their, reality a little bit. Overall, I think the truth is coming out, and I think with this, I'll give you an example. This film really does the job, I believe, of priming the public in the sense that a skeptic or someone who knows nothing about the topic could watch it and say, "Wow, I did not realize all this was going on. This is really credible." There are very credible people, household names, some of which I'm very familiar with, that are basically saying these things are real. And when we had these private screenings with Netflix and Stars and A&E and a number of different outlets, I think they were kind of expecting, another little, UFOs on the sci-fi flick, and my rep called me right after the screening happened in New York last week, and he said, "Dude, these guys' jaws hit the floor." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, man, they had no idea what was coming down the pike." And so I feel like the fact that we're getting mainstream distribution in theaters, this could be one of those phenomenal things that just spread word of mouth. You remember, because there's so many people that have their suspicions on cover-ups, and maybe they know a little about Roswell, or they've heard about Area 51, or they've, God knows, or their cousin had a sighting. I think it validates a lot of what people have been saying in the UFO community, and it mainstreams it to the fact that we can talk about this stuff and not get laughed at. And I really believe that this film is going to do that for us.
I think,
you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I think your film is helping toward a tipping point. I don't know how much more we're going to need, but I do think it's moving all of us in that direction. And what I mean is, you've got, particularly looking at your section on the ATIP program, which is quite significant. And I'm folding that into your whole treatment of the Tic Tac UFO incident, where you've got a nice interview with David Fravor relating to that. That's actually really powerful. When you hear Fravor talking about his encounter with the Tic Tac UFO, people who've been following this subject have heard Commander Fravor talk about this on a number of occasions. But you had a fresh interview with him. And I just want to say it's a very strong interview. He comes across as he always does, which is very competent, very professional. That's how David Fravor is. But he was able to provide a lot of context and information that sometimes people forget. For instance, describing how after his encounter with this object, which he described taking off with the snap of a finger, how it was then at the cap point, which is their rendezvous point, which was only communicated to these pilots via very heavily encrypted communications. And I think Fravor said something and that just made gave me goosebumps, or
the hair on the back. The hair on the back of his neck stood up.
That's it, yeah. And it's significant because an object is not supposed to be able to defeat U.S. naval encryptions in their communications like that at all. It's not supposed to happen. But this thing was there and then instantly at the cap point. So, I mean, that's really important information. It's been out there, but he put it together in a very powerful way for your film. So I was very happy to see that. Very happy.
Thank you. I loved that interview. We put that section together. Richard just had an encounter with Fravor. We spent probably not consistently, but about a year getting that edit right. Because we did it, we stepped away, we opened it back up again, we re-edited it, we did it, we stepped away, we opened it back up again, we re-edited it. I'm not kidding you. We did that for over a year. And then a gentleman did some recreations, some really nice, pretty nice recreations.
They were good, yes, they were good.
Yes, and he made those recreations available for our film free of charge. We're so grateful for that, and that really made it added nicely to the encounter. You know,
that was, I think, important that you did a nice graphic representation of the Tic Tac UFO encounter, and that did add to it quite a bit for sure. So I like that.
I think that is such and my 5-year-old son is riveted by that section.
Good.
He's like, seriously, watching. He's like, oh yeah, because it's got airplanes and excitement and turns and high speed. You know?
Hey, if you can keep a 5-year-old really cool. into it, you've done well.
Yeah, so let me just expand on what I'm saying right now, because the distribution company recommended a Dolby surround sound mix for the film. Well, I'm so busy just trying to get cut right and get all everything, make sure everything's accurate. I'm sending out copies of the film, make sure everything's accurate and done right, and any dates wrong. So I'm really busy just trying to, with that whole aspect of delivering the movie. And I started doing some research on Dolby, and they said it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended. So I said, okay, I'll look into it. I looked into it, and it's obviously a very expensive process. Long story short, I decided, to hell with it. I'm in this far. I should hire a professional sound designer, engineer, to do the sound. Because when you're in the theater, and let's just say, the Fravor encounter, or the William Coleman encounter at the beginning of the movie with the B-25, when that plane flies overhead or does these maneuvers, with the sound done properly, that sound is going to bounce around the room in the theater. So when the plane flies over, the speakers are going to start on one side, and as the plane passes over, as does the audio. So it'll really make the audience, the viewer, put them in that scene.
They'll feel it
more.
They'll feel it, yeah.
So I was talking to the sound designer just the other day. They've been at it for 4 weeks now. They've got another week to go. I'm going to L.A. for the final mix-down. I said, during these encounters and during the moments of face-to-face contact, like, for instance, the case in Afghanistan, I want the audience to feel it, not hear it, feel it. Like, I want that auditorium to rumble. You know what I mean?
Yes, indeed.
He's like, oh, yeah, because I want it to be part of the experience. It's not just, it's an experience. I want it to be an exciting experience.
Well, you talk about the audience feeling it, and there's something that the audience will feel, which is the final segment of this film of yours, which I would say focuses on the Ruwa, Zimbabwe school children case from 1994. Are you prepared to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I will just provide my own commentary on it, which, people who follow the UFO subject probably are somewhat familiar with this. You've got, I think, 62 school children at a school in Zimbabwe in a little town called Ruwa, the Ariel school, and they had an encounter with a landed object and beings. And the thing is, they were kids, but they were fortunately captured on video at the time, and these were some of the most articulate, sweet, sincere, intelligent kids. Like, you just want a whole society with kids like this, you know? And they were fantastic witnesses. John Mack was able to interview them, and that's been available on YouTube for some time. But what you did was you interviewed them as adults, and you got their story. And I feel like that was a very appropriate emotional way to, finish this film. I was just wondering if you had any other insights as to what you got out of that, or what you learned from it, or in general what you think about that.
So, first of all, I want to let your listeners know that Randall Nickerson was very helpful in putting this segment together initially some time ago. I think that he was slightly concerned because he's been producing a film on this topic for quite some time, which I believe is coming out later this year, I believe.
Yes, I'm really hopeful. I know Randall as well. I interviewed him for this program a little over a year ago. He's a fantastic guy and has been dedicated to this case for the longest time. And so he's very involved.
I really believe that our film, because we only touch on it for, I think, 7 minutes, our film is going to really help propel his film into the limelight because, and I say this as someone who didn't believe that this case happened. I heard about it in the 90s when I was just dumb enough to think that I could get an interview with Steven Spielberg, and his associate, this woman Janet Yang. I went through her, and she said, no, he's not going to give the interview. This went on for weeks. He's not going to give you the interview, but he does want you to know there was a landing in Africa that he thinks is one of the most compelling close encounters in modern history.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just said to myself, oh, yeah, a flying saucer landed at a school in Africa, and the occupants got out and interacted with the school children in broad daylight, and the whole world doesn't know about it? No way. No way. And I wrote it off. I wrote it off for another 10 years. And the reason why I'm saying this is I know that there's no way in hell the general public is going to believe that case happened without learning some of the history. And that is what we tried to do with the phenomenon, is build slowly to that case to increase the likelihood of a general audience accepting the possibility that might have just happened. That's why we keep it to the last case. That's why I think that the audience is going to be wanting more of that case. And that's why I think that this film, The Phenomenon, is going to really help the success of aerial phenomenon because it's just solely on that case. And if the general audience doesn't have enough history to understand that this could have just happened, then they're not going to believe it. That's my opinion.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I think you've got a good point there. It's an extraordinary case. The witnesses are very compelling, both back in 1994 and today. They're very, they're all grown up and they're professional. And, you and Randall, I know, have interviewed them. They're very, very crystal clear about what happened all those years ago. But it is good that you sort of created the environment in the everything that precedes it in the film to open it up for this possibility. So yeah, I think you've got a good point there. I think it's a strong case on its own, but I often forget as well because I'm so deeply into the UFO phenomenon. I don't have a hurdle to go over to believe some of these cases, but most people do, right? Because they don't know the history. And so
absolutely.
That's right.
Here's another thing that I was really concerned about, Richard. I've got pretty high-level known public figures in this film. They are going to be associated with a film dealing with close encounters of the third kind. That's kind of a big deal, and that's something that it's a slippery slope, and I've never I've never, have you looked at any of my previous works, 50 Years of Denial, Out of the Blue, version 1, version 2, I Know What I Saw? I don't deal with Close Encounters of the Third Kind because it's too, in my opinion, prior to this, too controversial. I really felt that you had to establish beyond a shadow of doubt that we're not just dealing with structured craft, technological, whizzing around with impunity in our airspace, but there's an intelligence behind it. The exploration of that intelligence, and therefore maybe even beings. And
right.
so we cover some of those cases early on in the film, the Father Gill case, the Close Encounter in France in the 50s, the 1964 landing case in Socorro. We cover all those really well and build up to the pinnacle, which is, in my opinion, the landing in Africa, just because of the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony.
Yes, agreed. And the emotional impact that it clearly had on those young people. It's just undeniable. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it was an appropriate way to end it. Hey, we've got about 10 minutes or so, and I wanted to go back a little bit, if you don't mind. And you did touch on the whole phenomenon of UFO secrecy to some extent when you were going through really your segment on ATIP, it seems to me, and Harry Reid. And another person that you interviewed quite extensively was Christopher Mellon. And I just will point out, I thought that his segments were very poignant and actually very powerful. Did you have what was your assessment of what the certain things that Christopher Mellon said to you relating to the UFO phenomenon, UFO secrecy?
Well, I would have to say that what I didn't realize, two things. One, I didn't realize that he was instrumental in getting those tapes out of the Pentagon into the New York Times. That's Christopher Mellon. And the other guy he worked with, it will remain nameless, but that was Christopher Mellon. Okay? And I didn't realize that he was so instrumental. He made that happen. He was, A, and B, when I was interviewing Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper back in the 90s, talking about that UFO landing case took in 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base.
Yes.
At the same time I was interviewing him, he was in the White House with President Clinton, and he got the go-ahead to go after, find, locate that footage of a landed flying saucer at Edwards Air Force Base. So we made that discovery when I was hanging out with him, which ended up in the movie. I brought that up with Reid. Reid said, yes, the stuff is there. Then I bring up Christopher Mellon because Christopher Mellon went after it during the Clinton administration.
Yeah.
Which is unbelievable.
That's an incredible thing to keep in mind. And the fact that, as he mentioned in the film, that he was a member of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, SEPOC, which is very, very significant. That's deeply ensconced in the DoD's, black budget management of the UFO phenomenon. For those of us who've looked into it, and he was part of that committee. So it's very obvious that he has been in his career in an ideal position. I don't know about a perfect position, but he's been in a very, very good position to know a lot about the matter of UFO secrecy within the government. So I thought it was significant that you got him to talk as much as you did, and he was clearly very forthcoming about the reality of this phenomenon and about the reality of the secrecy within the government.
That's one thing that baffled me for so long, Richard, and it continues to this day. I meet with these high-level government officials, and I ask them point blank, if you can't get access to this stuff, who can? If President Clinton couldn't get access to this stuff, who can?
Oh, yeah, you had a really interesting quote by Clinton that I had not heard that exact quote before, where he almost jokingly says this as an aside, but he's quite serious. You can tell he's quite serious, that he tried and failed to get access.
He tried.
Yeah.
He tried.
So go on.
I got the inside scoop on the Rockefeller initiative as well. not as much of that. I interviewed Marie Bootsy Galbraith,
Yeah.
Don Berliner. There's a number of very influential, highly connected individuals that unfortunately have to remain nameless who helped facilitate those meetings.
Hey, finish your thought. I kind of jumped in there at an inopportune time, but you were saying if president can't get access to this, who can? Did you have a follow-up on that?
So that's what baffled me so much. And I think, Richard, and I could be totally wrong, okay? I'm not making a statement that I say is true, or I'm just saying likely, the way it feels to me now, that there seems to have left government and gone into the private sector. And those are the people that seem to have, because then it's legitimately outside of government reach, right? Of oversight. So if, anyway.
Well, that's been my own personal conclusion for quite some time. And I think, I won't belabor this. I think, though, that privatization of UFO secrecy has been a major element that we have to understand. But I would say that it's privatized, but it is still protected through elements of the United States national security complex. So through the DoD, through the CIA, and also through probably the Department of Energy are very likely the three U.S. departments by which privatized corporate control of the UFO secret is maintained. I think basically the U.S. government serves as their private security force, but that the people really running the show are private money that, let's face it, they control governments anyway. They certainly have tremendous influence over all the Western governments.
I'll just say one more thing, and that is that Senator Reid did indicate unequivocally that even the Pentagon is sitting on a bunch of really compelling evidence still. So there is obviously some stuff there. I'm sure it's an ongoing process of collecting, right?
Yes.
And that's another thing that I've learned. I know we only have a couple minutes left. But
we do, and I want you to tell people how to learn about the film. But go on.
Okay, yeah. There's a big article coming out on Wednesday, and God, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it.
Gizmodo, sure.
Gizmodo, thank you. They're doing an exclusive 24-hour article, and they're going to feature the movie trailer. There are going to be updates. We're going to have a website that'll just simply be updates and trailer. I just don't have all that information as of right now, but just keep their eyes out. The trailer's going to go out on Wednesday. All we have to do is Google the phenomenon, there's going to be a really major rollout of this film. We've got one of the best publicists in New York, Falco, working with us. We have a lot of people working behind the scenes. They're making this a big featured event, and we're all hands on deck.
So when is it going to be released?
It's going to be released September 1st, is what I'm told, in theaters all across the country.
Wow. Well, I'm going to tell you, people will have a lot to look forward to. It's going to come out, and I think it will be a very significant rollout of a UFO film that, again, it's got a lot of new information on it. Is there a website yet, James? Or is that up where people can check it?
No, there's not a website yet. I'm sorry. No.
Well, we're just teasing the hell out of people right now. They're going to be like, wait, September. But I will say, now I feel really guilty that I got to see it so early. But I will just say it's a heck of a film, and I do believe people have a lot to look forward to. And also, if I just can say, I think it's going to add a lot to the public conversation about UFOs, which is what you were talking about earlier. I think you're right, it will.
Well, I really appreciate all your support, and it means a lot to me. And we're all in this together. That's one thing about the UFO community. They tend to be really competitive and backstabbing, and I really don't want to have that outlook. I think we should all work together and focus on a common goal and move the needle forward.
I agree 100% with that. And look, we're all in this together. And those of us who care about the reality of this phenomenon need to support each other. If there are minor differences of opinion, that's insignificant. The important thing is that we get this subject out there to the public to educate the world. And you're doing that, and I think you really need to be commended.
Thank you, Richard. I really, together we stand, divided we fall.
Well, James, if you send me any website information, any other place where people can reach you, I will make sure that we have links to that. Is there a generic website where people can find you, or is there a good place where people can reach you?
No.
You're very smart about that.
Not yet.
Actually.
I know. We're going to fix it. I know. I've just been so busy on this movie. I can't tell you. I don't have time for you.
I don't know if that's a bad idea, actually. Sometimes it's good not to be able to be reached. So, well,
you know how to reach me. You know how to get in touch with me. So
Yeah, that doesn't count. I'm just saying for other people. But I think we have a lot to look forward to, and I got to say I'm excited that I got to see it, and I think people, when they do get a chance to see it, will feel exactly the same way. So, James Fox, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for appearing on this program.
Thanks for having me on, Richard. I really enjoyed it.
You bet. Many thanks to James Fox, and thanks to you for listening. If you like what you see here, like and share this video, and subscribe to my channel. We live in interesting times, and the subject of UFOs, pushed to the sidelines for so long, sure looks like it's pushing its way back to our attention. Catch you later, and let's keep fighting the good fight.